What's up, everybody? It's Luke Thomas here in Las Vegas, Nevada. You can see I'm in my hotel room. How does that look, huh? Creepy. Looks very creepy. I know. Well, I'd open up the window behind me, but then the light would come in and it would make it look bad. I finally got it situated where the light's not terrible, but it's kind of cutting off my head. So maybe I can push this chair back a little bit. Yeah, that's better. What's up, everyone? Hope you're doing well. Today is, let's see, Wednesday, the 5th of July. It's the day after the 4th, of course, because I traveled on the 4th to get here. Hope you're doing well. We'll go for about 90 minutes today. I want to make sure this is working on MMA fighting. We've got a new back end, and as a consequence, some changes have been made. Yeah, it's not quite working there. Let's see if I can't fix it real quick. We'll be talking about UFC 213. We'll talk about International Fight Week. We'll talk about, let's see, how about, let's see here, we'll move to the art, embed, art, get embed. So video not found. That's not good news. I don't know what to do with that then. That is going to be fun. All right, well, I don't know what to do about it. This one's not on me. This is the new back end. So, believe it or not, I have nothing to do with this one. View story. Not on me, gang. Let me tuck my off. Looks like it's not working. If you're having trouble watching this on MMA Fighting, I suggest you go to the YouTube channel itself directly. I'm going to tweet that link. Let's see. I'll do that right now. Sorry, y'all. This is not on me. This one's not on me. All right. Let's put that up. If you're having trouble seeing the live chat vid, go here. And then we put that in the comments. Apologies, y'all. I swear to God, this one's 100% not on me. Usually it is. 99% of the time it is. Just not today. Heads up. If you're having issues watching the video, go here. All right. Well, I can't worry about it because there's nothing I can do about it anyway. Everything else is working on my end. So, appreciate you guys watching. Apologize for the technical difficulties, or at least it's working on YouTube. I've got my coffee. You can see my coffee behind me there. I am in the Delano, which is the nicer tower of Mandalay Bay. Was not expecting this. Showed up at 11 last night. They're like, would you like a room in the Delano? I said, yes, of course I would. So I'm in a very nice room. I'm very excited about that. Nice and quiet, too. I have put on the button to let the ladies know to not come and bother me. You know, it's like a do not disturb sign, but you know these cleaning ladies, it's their world. We're just living in it. So we'll see how things go. We'll see what my boss says about this. Maybe it's working. I don't know. I don't know what the hell's happening here. I can't see anything. I don't know. It's working. Forget it. Let's move on. Can't worry about it now, can we? All right, first question. It's a bit of a weird one given what's going on this week. By the way, the itinerary for today is I'll do this chat. Then I will go and do the open workouts of today. They have switched things. Normally it would work out where you have media day, then workouts, then weigh-ins, then fight day. Now they're doing it, because they said they pulled the media, but I can assure you they didn't ask me this. Or I don't think they asked Ariel either. Now they're doing it where they go workouts, media day, weigh-ins. And I know that doesn't sound like the biggest difference, but media day is better for me on Wednesdays. So whatever. So as soon as this is over, heading out to that. By the way, if you're in Las Vegas, that is free and open to the public. I believe it's at the Park Theater. Okay, Johnny Hendricks. I've always been a fan of JH. But what is going on? 2012, 2013, he destroys everyone, then loses to GSP. That controversy gets buried by GSP's retirement, Briefly, he becomes champion, but then gets instantly forgotten due to Lawler's comeback story, then gets whipped by Wonder Boy. He's now missed weight 3 times, has seemed, frankly, deranged in front of media at times, and a shell of the fighter he was. Can we simply say Johnny was running on roids and cannot compete in the USADA age? And if not, what the hell has happened, and why does the UFC keep feeding him to killers? Yeah, so this is a great question. So I actually asked Johnny these questions myself. My boss is going to try embedding the video, by the way, directly into the post, so we'll see how this goes. I appreciate your patience. Back to Johnny Hendricks. Okay, what do we say about Johnny? So I asked him these questions directly. I asked him what happened to his punching power, and basically that there's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of belief that things were different for him in the USADA, the pre-USADA era. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But let me tell you what he said, and let me tell you what I think is probably likely. Certainly I'm curious at this point about to what extent he was benefiting from pre-USADA anti-doping conditions. Now, I don't know. It's a different conversation for a different time, but his answer for the punching power was that he's had some weight issues which affected his ability to really have energy, and that people used to fight him differently before they realized he had knockout power. And once they did, they began to fight him differently. There's probably some truth to that, but obviously I don't think that's the sum total. Now, the issues you're speaking of where he sounded deranged, I was at that press conference. That was the media day for UFC 207. And he sounded terrible. He didn't make sense. I actually had him on the air that morning, and then I saw him later, and that was where he was challenging people, challenging media members to like weight cutting contests. That was bad. It was really, really bad. That, to me, that part of it is no doubt from weight cutting. I asked him how long he's been weight cutting. He's been wrestling since he was 8. We're talking more than 20 years. Not necessarily of hardcore weight cutting, but of some kind of dieting and weight manipulation that probably wasn't all that great. Now, how much if he was doing that as an 8-year-old, maybe not much, but certainly by the time he was maybe at 12 or 13 or some of that. So it's close to 20 years of this kind of thing, and I think he's absolutely savaged his body. If you want to add on to that, I think, some kind of, this point, of reasonable suspicion that maybe there were other things going on that we don't know about, I think you're probably welcome to do that, but without definitive proof, it's going to be hard to say. But that said, USADA and anti-doping are always upping their ability to go back and test old samples with more modern technology. Perhaps that will be something that they can do going forward. So we'll see how things turn out in the end. In the end, maybe he's vindicated in the sense that it's just bad career management and terrible weight cutting. In the end, he may not be vindicated. I don't know how that one's going to go. Another thing to consider, for this last fight anyway, as far as this one goes, I know he changed his strength and conditioning coach and some of the guys he was training with. I know he had done a lot of work with Stephen Wright. I think he's trained with Stephen Wright 2 times this past camp. And that was the guy from Team Takedown. And he went with sort of a new coaching staff. And that new strength and conditioning guy apparently had him hitting the weights and wasn't all that concerned about making 185. And you saw what happened there. So I do think he could probably make 185. And I do think that changing those coaches, probably they messed up on the calibration. But there's obviously the larger question of what happened to his punching power, what happened to his ability to just sort of naturally be a more aggressive, successfully offensive fighter. And I think it's a combination of the things we know about. And I do think there's probably some point for reasonable suspicion here. But reasonable suspicion is not the same as evidence. And we always need to be careful about that. So if you individually, privately as a fan, want to think it has to do with the fact that you saw this here, you are certainly welcome to that. But I think media would have to be a little bit more responsible in sort of trying to figure out what happened here. But you can't also just live in a world where you exclude those things. Well, we don't know, so I can't take it into consideration. I mean, we're talking about a pretty dramatic drop-off in performance. I do think you have to take into consideration those things. It's just that it's just you're hamstrung a little bit by what you can reasonably think about it if you're trying to make a public case. my boss here. Someone saying IV ban. I wonder if the IV ban is a big cause for poor performance. So many of the former champs have struggled since the rule went into effect. They struggle to make weight and seem flat on fight night. Maybe it's a coincidence. Big Rig is 1-4. Showtime 1-3. Weidman 0-3. Ronda 0-2. Henin 1-1. But of course, the IV ban is overlapping with USADA. So that could. It's hard to say what's what. It's really hard to say what's what without more definitive information, but that's a pretty reasonable speculation. Someone also says he's only 33, but it seems like we're watching the end of his very sad career. Yeah, yeah. Good on YouTube. Yeah, I don't know what to do. If you're watching an MMA fight, well, you're not watching an MMA fighting because it doesn't work on MMA fighting, but not sure what to tell you guys. I know it's going to be like, Luke's got tech problems again. This one's not on me. Trust me. Okay. This is interesting. I'm going to wreck this because I want to answer this one. Hi, Luke. Just from my interpretation, this weekend sees two big fights. Pitching a strategy procedure-based fighter, Michael Johnson, Robert Whittaker, fighting a more impulsive, off-the-cuff fighter, Justin Gaethje, Yoel Romero. I would like to know, given your experience, what would you think are the main differences in each type of fighter's training when faced with the current task in hand? Also, do impulsive fighters spend more time just training their physical attributes so they can carry out those wild, Gaethje, or athletic attacks, Romero, where the process fighters continue to drill the basics and improve timing and decision-making? Or maybe an instinct fighter becomes more process-driven when they are dealing with a known quantity, whereas a process-driven fighter become less drilled when they are faced with such an uncontrollable situation. I hope you know what I'm trying to say, but please tell me if I'm talking nonsense and skip to the next question. No, it's actually a really good question. Process-driven versus fighting on instinct. Love this question. That's one reason why I like these matchups. Here's my view on this, because this is not merely something that pertains to fight sports. It's more pronounced in fight sports, but you see it in team sports as well, where over time, the best teams are the ones where not merely from what the coach is doing, but the front office in terms of talent acquisition, in terms of, let's say, the American football, acquiring talent through the draft, right? The teams with the best process, they may not win every year. In fact, they may have years where they do okay, and they have years where they do poorly, and some of that can be just variance due to injury or something like that. But over time, what you see is that the franchises that do the best are the ones that internally have the smoothest, efficient, smartest processes. So it's not a guarantee for success, but it is, on average, your best bet. In other words, in the case, I would say over time, the best champions, the most successful ones, are going to be closer to what the kind of Michael Johnsons and Robert Whittakers do, where they follow a process. Now, Johnson has been known to brawl, but let's look at the case of Robert Whittaker. Very methodical. Has a game plan, sticks to his strengths, has a vision and a step-by-step plan on how to get there. Over time, I think that guy's going to be more successful than someone who just goes out there and fights in a way where they are savage and hard to deal with, but they are somewhat, it's impromptu, it's improvisational. That improvisational fighting can be very, very dangerous, because not only does, the fighter himself not know what he's going to do, certainly the opponent has no real way of anticipating that. And a lot of times these attacks can come in just these incredibly difficult ways to anticipate. And so they can do quite well. It's not fair to say that can't be successful, because it can. But over time, just think about what MMA is. Success in MMA is the ability to control for chaos. And that's why the process versus instinct fighter debate is really interesting, because real success, sustained success at a championship level, comes from having a very clear training and execution and strategy process all working together. And in so doing, controlling for chaos. Not really the chaos of the fighter you're fighting, because you might be fighting another process-driven fighter as well, but that there are just so many variables that can affect something and success in MMA. and your ability to control for them. That's why GSP to me was so successful. He had this incredible ability to control for a lot of different variables. And so he had this sustained success over time, and a couple of hiccups along the way, right? But you get the idea. So to me, if Whittaker lost, it wouldn't be necessarily a direct undermining of the idea that the process-driven fighter is somehow misplaced and trying to be organized, but rather that it's hard to control for all those variables. Maybe there was some part of their process that needs tweaking, that kind of thing. But if you just think of MMA success as the ability to control for a number of chaos or variables in chaos, pardon me, you begin to see the value in having a process-driven training environment and strategy. Nunes Schevchenko and stamina issues. Nunes' stamina issues have been brought up a lot during the lead up to the UFC 213 for understandable reasons. But we haven't really seen how Nunes has been able to address the problem due to her last two matches ending as fast as they did. Do you think Nunes has been able, to improve on that front, and how large of a role do you think the endurance will play in this fight? Also, is it at all weird that Nunes is insisting that she didn't fade in the first fight due to endurance issues, but because she was confused by Shevchenko's stance? Yeah, I saw that. She goes, well, she was a southpaw and she threw me off. It's like, right, but the way in which you scored in that fight was not really on the feet. If you go back and watch it, there was a lot of counter-finding that what Shevchenko is how Shevchenko was trying to counter her with like a check hook over the top most of the time. And that ultimately was what did Newton. Well, when Shevchenko threw kicks, there was easy takedowns for Nunes to get. And when she got them, Shevchenko had enough to moderately defend herself on the ground, but not do a whole lot with it. Certainly not threaten very much, like the way she was able to do against Juliana Pena. So here's the interesting part about this fight, is that if you're Shevchenko, how do you approach this contest if you fundamentally believe that the gas tank is going to be an issue for her? Do you fight cautiously and not throw kicks and just sort of let her naturally wear herself out? Do you really put it on her and see if you can't exacerbate the end? Because the truth is, Amanda Nunes can fight on the outside, but she's a good brawler too. Plus, Amanda Nunes can take it to the ground where she is, even if Shevchenko has made up ground, Nunes is still going to be better on the ground. Right? I mean, there might be less of a gap than there was before, but there's still going to be a gap. It's a really interesting question. I do think she is going to fade. I do think she's had I think she's had conditioning issues more than once. It was just readily apparent in that one. The question is, will it be too little, too late? What was Shevchenko's problem in the first one? She was giving away rounds. She was giving away rounds from inactivity. Then when she would throw inactivity, it would be an advisable activity like a kick. Nunes would catch it, take it to the ground, and then essentially just ride her out there for the rest of the round. And it's an oversimplification, but that's a lot of what happened. So if you're Nunes, if you're Shevchenko, your task here is to put just enough pressure on her to make her work without being super overcommitted positionally or finding the wrong offensive weapon. That can be taken advantage of, where she can just simply grind you out. And for Nunes, it's quite the opposite. It's to be offensive enough to really, I don't know if I'm Nunes, I'm going to try and take her down and look for the back. I'm not really going to strike with her too much on the outside. I think the ground game is really where she's going to have a lot of success. It's going to be hard to submit her, Nunes, and it's going to be hard to positionally make a ton of advancements on her. I think Shevchenko can probably survive and defend and maybe even attack this time, but it's going to be a lot more work. It's going to be a lot more work. It's an interesting one. To me, though, the question is really not so much what Amanda's going to do. She can just follow the same game plan as before for the most part. It's more how Shevchenko is going to calibrate that and what new skills she has. If her takedown defense is better and she's not going to lose a round on the ground, what kind of opportunities that give her on the feet? Everyone's like, Amanda is a rangier, probably more powerful striker, but I think Shevchenko's a better counter striker, and I think she's got better accuracy too. Someone says, how important do you think the clinch will be in this fight? It seems to me that both Valentina and Amanda have gotten better at adapting their judo to MMA, especially in the clinch with high percentage takedowns. I think whoever wins in the clinch battles wins this fight. Also, Schevchenko was lighting her up a little bit in the clinch as well. You just don't want to spend too much time there because positionally, if you get locked up and now you're twisting and you're turning and you're walking and you're coming back, that's a lot more time for Amanda to get a trip, a knee tap, some kind of something, an inside trip. It's just, you want to spend just enough time there to do damage. But if I'm Schevchenko, who is naturally smaller than Nunes, I want to get in there. I want to do a little bit of work and I want to exit. I don't want to spend a lot of time there. You don't want to spend a lot of time locked up with Amanda Nunes because she's probably bigger and stronger and better on the ground. So, it's not that you can't work in that space, but, once you get in there, clock's ticking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go. That kind of thing. McGregor's camp. Last week, John Kavanaugh was talking on Ariel's show like he's heavily involved in Conor's game plan against Mayweather. Doesn't it sound ridiculous? This is his words, not mine. He even said he's going to give a prediction of a KO later on. For the record, I recognize Kavanaugh as one of the best coaches in MMA, and as far as I know, he's mostly a grappling coach. So is he lying, or is he really involved in Conor's boxing training? Well, he's definitely involved, of course. Obviously, there are general things he can really help with him that are present in both sports. I mean, look, I think those guys have a real special bond. There's not a lot of duos in MMA where you've got one guy and one coach, and they're really ultra hugely successful. You see that a little bit. Let's say, for example, GSP, Faraz Zahabi, Mike Winkeljohn, John Jones. And it's more than just Mike Winkeljohn, of course. It's Tusa, it's Brandon Gibson, it's a lot of guys, right? But, what do you guys want me to say about it? Like, I agree. John is, obviously an enormously successful MMA coach and really a national pioneer. I don't know enough about that camp to really give you a great answer on this one without talking to him. My hunch is that because they're such a tight duo, excluding John Kavanaugh would be a dramatic mistake. But, this is the challenge they're up against. Like, Kavanaugh is obviously a very talented MMA coach, proven, a very talented coach in a number of dimensions, whether it's striking or it's grappling, proven. But it seems like all of these guys are overwhelmed by the challenge of what it means to fight Mayweather. It's not really that McGregor has to fight Mayweather. It's that McGregor's team has to strategize against a guy like that. And are they really the ones best situated to do that? From the outside looking in, that seems impossible to believe, but lots of things have seemed impossible to believe with that guy. Now here's the other components of that. There are other trainers there, Owen Roddy, for example, and I'm sure they have some other ones as well. When they come to the States, I had Paulie Malignaggi on my show on Friday. Paulie's going to be there as a sparring partner, but I suspect Paulie is going to offer a fair amount of wisdom. Now, maybe that'll be too little too late. Maybe it'll be right on time. In the end, I guess we'll find out. But I think all I'm pointing out to you is that everything about this feels like these guys are taking on a task that, seems is the operative word here, insurmountable. Way too much. Way too much. The whole thing, every time you try to examine it, you just feel like none of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. And all the way down to what their game plan is going to be. Look, let's see what they can do. This is the interesting part about this fight because we mentioned it before, there's a lot of different ways that this thing can go. What I'm wondering is, let's say Conor loses, but it goes 12 rounds, and Conor loses handily, but not in any way, shape, or form embarrassingly. In other words, okay, Mayweather was the better guy, but the bigger lesson here is that McGregor more than held his own. Now, whatever likelihood you want to put on that, fine. But let's just say that happens. So they lost, but it was clear that they were on to something. Yeah. What would that do to both sports? You know, what would that do? What would that say? Part of me feels like what could end up happening here, whether it's unlikely or not, but what could end up happening here is that if McGregor does something like that, and I don't know that it would be fair that this would happen, but I feel like it might rewrite some conventional wisdom about the level of MMA striking. That the biggest complaints about MMA striking have typically been through the prism of the cleanliness of boxing. If you watch boxing, we talked about this before, you have far fewer weapons and you have a much more constrained fighting territory. And so it requires the most expert precision in that space, which is why they get started young. And then by the time they've been in it more than a decade, that's when they turn pro. That's when really the best ones do it, right? Floyd is like that. He started as, you know, however young, less than 10 years old, something like that, and turned pro after the Olympics, and really sort of came into his own years after that. It takes that long to get good at it, given those constraints. Is it possible that MMA is somehow a shortcut to this? I don't think that'll be true, but I do think that if Conor goes out there and proves a bunch of us all wrong, he might end up rewriting a lot of the conventional wisdom that we think about striking in the two arts. Now, again, the likelihood of this feels so remote as to make this conversation almost silly, but this is the territory and the space that we're in. We have to do this now because it would be irresponsible to at least not consider the implications of these kinds of things. And to your point of your question, you're like, you know, look, these guys are amazing in MMA. Are they really the best guys to be strategists in a domain where they don't have, I won't say any success, but certainly at the elite professional level, at that level, any success? Are these really the best guys? It makes no sense. It makes no sense. So either what we're going to find out is, and I mentioned this before, everyone's like, what's your prediction about Mayweather and McGregor? My prediction is this, and this goes to your question. If what we know about the known world is true, right? If what we think about the known world and all the assumptions we make is true, Conor has no chance. The question is, are our assumptions about the known world somehow misplaced one way or the other? That's what this event is going to tell us. The most and least anticipated fights of the upcoming weekend. Oh, by the way, someone says another duo, DJ and Matt Hume. Yep, it's another one. These duos, they're big, right? Like there's not a whole lot of them that you can really point to, but the ones you can think of are like highly successful. The most and least anticipated fights of the coming weekend. What fights are you looking forward to most this weekend? Okay, well, I mean, there's a lot of ones on the Ultimate Fighter 25. I mean, you know, finale. I don't, you know, how many of those do I care about? Not many, but let's say most on each card. How about this? We'll start there. Well, I mean, there's just no doubt about it. Michael Johnson, Justin Gaethje is, I mean, who is not excited for that, for crying out loud? That's like an incredible contest. Also excited, I can never pronounce his name, Mark Diakisi versus Jafar Close. I don't think that's the most like amazing matchup, but I think very highly of, again, Diakisi, however you pronounce it. He's obviously incredibly talented, so it's another nice step, you know. Who else am I looking at here? That's about it, really, on that card. Angela Hill, Ashley Yoder is pretty good. And then the Jared Cannonier fight was supposed to be better because it was going to be Steve Bossy, but you know, Jared Cannonier's a pretty good guy. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, least anticipated, you know, Gray Maynard versus Teruto Ishihara, I guess. And then if you go to UFC 213, most anticipated for me is definitely going to be Romero Whittaker. You know, I like the main event just fine, but Romero Whittaker is really a superb contest. Least anticipated, probably Brown versus Olynyk. You know, you could pick Thiago Santos, Gerald Meerschaert, I guess, you know, if you want to pick guys who have less of a profile, but kind of amazing that Travis Brown has a big fight this weekend. There's like no one talking about it, you know. So yeah, there you go. Missing McGregor, somebody says. Luke, forget about the forthcoming Mayweather boxing charade. Tell us the truth. As a member of the media, do you miss Conor McGregor in the UFC? Of course. Of course. Or do you find the whole bravado circus around him tiresome and distracting? Yes, I do. Both things are true. As a fan, I found myself watching YouTube clips of his press conferences, old embedded, etc., as well as his fights, and I couldn't help feel but nostalgic and miss not having him involved in fights in the last 8 to 9 months. The guy, whether you love him or you hate him, is a big draw and is constantly entertaining both in and out of the octagon. So I'm curious how a media member like yourself feels about his absence from a professional standpoint. He gives out such material and provides much entertainment that I would be shocked if you said you didn't miss him. Well, I don't really, I mean, this may come as a surprise to you. I don't really care so much about that press conference stuff. I'm not saying I don't care, but it's not what I think. When I think about McGregor, I don't really think about his wins and his losses. But yeah, look, the guy is obviously a special talent. Don't you want that guy competing if you're covering the sport? Of course you do, man. Of course. Like I couldn't imagine a media member saying otherwise. Now, nakedly, am I going to admit that it's also great when McGregor competes? Because it's great for media. Traffic is through the roof. Everyone watches your videos. Everyone reads your articles. Everyone shares your tweets or whatever. Yeah, like it's good business when McGregor's in town. It's red panty night for all of us. But the truth of the matter is I just want to see the guy compete, man. I want to see the guy compete. You know, I want to see what he can do. I want to see what his limits are. I feel like one of the problems with McGregor is that we all know he's crazy talented, but he's so polarizing. No, obviously he's beloved. I'm not saying he's not Josh Koscheck or something. He's beloved. But what I mean is, and I mentioned this before, I tweeted this once. I was like, McGregor's fights are, but it's just hard to make sense of reality around him sometimes. Because number one, he'll go and he'll hallucinate Diaz, and he'll come back and beat Diaz, and it's controversial-ish, not really, but a little. He smoked Jose Aldo, and he smoked Eddie Alvarez, and he's gone. Now he's fighting Mayweather. I mean, it's like nothing ever makes sense. And he has this cult of personality where his fans feverishly believe that he can do anything if he just puts his mind to it. And as a consequence, they have these incredibly outsized expectations for what's possible. On the other hand, you have his detractors, and now you see many of these pop up in the boxing world, somewhat understandably, but okay, detractors nevertheless, who are incredibly dismissive of him. Shockingly so. Shockingly dismissive of the guy. And so, on the one hand, it's he can do anything. On the other hand, it's he can do nothing. He's the most amazing guy ever. He's trash. And so you obviously know the truth is somewhere in there, probably closer to that end than that end, but it just makes understanding him hard. And the way in which you can get a better understanding of that is the more they compete. The more they compete, you can really get a sense of things. Someone's got 50 fights, 50 pro fights. A pretty good sense of things because McGregor, the McGregor who we got introduced to in the Marcus Brimage fight is not the same guy now. He's better and different, and patterns have changed, and offensive priorities have changed, and some things have stayed the same, of course. But all I'm saying is there's a lot of guys that have the same amount of fights, but they've not had this amount of hoopla and cult of personality and then detractors, and there's this weird confluence of events that all descend on McGregor, and everyone wants to say what they know about him, and everyone wants to write the story of McGregor. Well, McGregor's writing it himself, but the problem is it can make it hard to understand what's what with him. I finally came around to him. I was wrong about him at first, and I finally came around to him, and I figured out, okay, the guy's obviously really, really good. But now you're trying to figure out, okay, exactly how good, right? How would he look against Khabib? How would he look against Tony? How would he look against, Ali Quinta? How would he look against? And you might say he beat all those guys, but you would at least see some interesting and new things about him. They all say you learn more about a guy through his losses, or that the fighter themselves learns more through losses than wins, but you can still learn a lot through wins, especially tough ones, right? You did learn a lot about McGregor in that second Diaz fight, because when he looked like he was maybe getting ready to collapse after that third round, he turned it around the fourth, and he came back out there and he put on a show. Like, this is what I mean. You learned something about the guy that day. And I just feel like one of the things I miss about him is because, number one, it's fun when you watch him fight. And he's always in big fights, and it's always good for us. But I feel like I don't understand him all that well, and which may sound crazy because you get more from him than anybody else in certain respects. But there's more about his ability as a fighter that I don't know, that I'm dying to know. I really, really, really want to know what that is, and I think that's the part I miss the most. Yeah. And that's the other problem. It's like, what if he goes in there and gets smoked by Mayweather, right? That's okay the first couple of rounds, and then by round 3, it's just, Mayweather takes over and KOs him in the 9th, or they just stop the fight. What are you going to say you learned about McGregor then? Okay, you could say you learned some things about hubris or overreach or delusions of grandeur, but that has nothing to do with his abilities as an MMA fighter. That would have been a giant waste of time. It's that we're living in the most unusual time ever. This is such a weird, bizarre contest that it's just hard to rationally make sense of what's possible and what's going to happen. Okay, marketable Romero. Hi, Luke. If Yoel Romero wins the interim UFC middleweight title this weekend, how much of a marketable champion could he be, in your opinion? Not very. Realistically, the UFC would probably prefer the English-speaking Robert Whittaker, who is less controversial and also has the youth on his side, and is promotable throughout Oceania. But if you consider the entertaining feud rivalry that has developed between Romero and Bisping, you think that the title reunification bout would generate more fan interest and ultimately more pay-per-view buys. Yeah, but that's good for like one fight. Beyond that, he doesn't have a ton of rivalries with everybody. And even if his English isn't great, who does the level Romero-Ray, the translator, interview? Yeah. Here's the problem with Romero. He's got the rivalry with Bisping, but he's, 40? Almost 40? Oh, so let me verify that before I speak out of turn. Yoel Romero is 40. He's 40. I don't think he's got a lot of time left in the sport. Now, I'm not saying his retirement is imminent, but I don't think he's got, he is a insane, he might be the best athlete in the UFC. And everyone thinks steroids and USADA. No, that's called genetics. The big read, I told you this, if you talk to people who cover amateur wrestling, and by the way, Romero's been tested at a higher level than any UFC fighter, save for maybe Daniel Cormier, and even then. For whatever testing is worth. The read on Romero was that he was probably the best athlete in the world when he was competing in international wrestling, but that his wrestling IQ was not great, that he made questionable decisions in key times, but he was able to just dominate the world with absurd athletics. That's the read on him. And I know people out there think, if I took steroids, I'd look like Yoel Romero. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't look 1/10 of what he looks like, nor would you compete like he does. He is clearly genetically gifted in a way that is very hard to overstate. So if you want to have suspicions about him, you're welcome to it. But for me, this is sort of what I'm talking about. There's something called the Gaussian curve, which is where the world's best athletes are at the very 5% end of the Gaussian curve, and even then on the plot points, they all don't overlap with necessarily the same traits. But you want to talk about a guy at the very end of the Gaussian curve, he's a genetic marvel. It's just always hilarious to me. Where we need a level playing field. You don't get one when you've got a guy like Yoel Romero walking through the door. The guy is a borderline genetic superhero. It's like a joke to say something like, "We want a level playing field." Okay, good luck with it. Good luck with a guy that's born, with cat-like reflexes. I mean, it's just whatever. In any case, Adrian Peterson shows up to the field, another genetic marvel. I demand a level playing field. Why? So everyone else can suffer? In the case of this, though, he's got not a lot of time left, I don't think, even though he is a genetic marvel. I mean, I'm sure he's got several more years, but after that, who knows? He could fall off a cliff. Not literally, I mean metaphorically. As he ages. Whittaker is, 25, 26. Ton of upside. Could be a great representative for a very important market for them. That doesn't mean so much to Americans, but it's a big deal for the UFC generally. And, Whittaker's a little bit boring, but I think he's boring by design. He's really focused on growth and achieving, and the process, to your point, the other question we answered earlier. And yeah, Bisping versus Romero would be amazing, right? For all the reasons that we know the answer would be. But I just don't feel like, the fact that Romero doesn't speak English hurts him. I don't know that he's some kind of unifying Latin figure either. I don't know who would be, you know. I mean, Latino star athletes tend to represent the nations from which they come, the territories from which they come. So Puerto Rico, Mexico, right? You know, Argentina. You know, it's not like Bolivians like, oh, look at this Argentinian, let's get behind him. It doesn't exactly. I mean, sometimes it works that way, but not exactly. Unless you're like Leo Messi when the world gets behind you, but you know what I mean. So to me, I think the longer, better play is Whittaker. But MMA gods are capricious and crazy deities, so we'll see what happens. Cheers, my cup of coffee. Dominic Cruz. Any news on Dominic Cruz and what his future looks like? I don't know, but I think he's here this weekend. If I see him, I will ask him. Will he look for a rematch with Cody, another bantamweight, or move it to featherweight? It's a good question. I don't know, but I will ask him. I swear to God, I will ask him if I see him. Has Cruz been nursing an injury? I remember he had plantar fascia tendonitis, which is nasty and doesn't go away quickly, if at all. It takes a long time to go away. Is it a case where he has too many injuries now and will struggle to actually train in order to fight again? Yeah, I think so. He had to get Botox shots in his feet to numb them out so he could train. Let me think about that for a second. Because the only way to heal his injury is to not train. So I think he can lower the training load, but he can't stop. And so I don't know what this is going to mean for him, to be honest. He's just got a really wear and tear kind of style. You know, the starts and the darts and the feints and the angle changes. It's just hard on the body. And yeah, I guess I'll talk to him and see what he says. Good question. Nick Diaz. Is it time we stop anxiously awaiting the return of Nick Diaz? Or is there still some shred of hope left? We may see him return one day, even if it isn't in the UFC. Well, first of all, if he does return, it's going to be in the UFC, number one, contractually. No one says, I've got an interview with him on the Diaz brothers are scheduled. They are scheduled to be in studio with me on Friday at 4:30 East Coast time, 1:30 local. So I'm going to ask him. I don't know what kind of answer he's going to give, but I'm going to answer. I'm going to ask it because it's what everyone wants to know. Dana White has said quite publicly that he thinks Nick is done. I don't want to speak for him, but I intend to find out in about 48 hours or so. Of course, I'll stream that live, so you'll all be able to see it. Holmes comments on Mayweather-McGregor. As you probably read already, Holly Holm gave her thoughts on the coming super fight. I don't call it a super fight, but it's something. And seemed to be much more optimistic about McGregor's chances than most. What did you think of her views on McGregor being able to match Mayweather's speed? No. And how it is easier to transition to boxing from MMA than vice versa. That part is true. That part is true. In fact, one of the interesting novelties about this is we've seen guys like Jeremy Williams, half man, half amazing, go from boxing to MMA at a pretty high level, at least in boxing. Not a super high level, but a good one, a respectable one. And then you had guys like Marcus Davis. But here's my point. Everyone that we know of that's done boxing and MMA typically went from boxing to MMA. Very few, we don't know anyone who's gone from elite MMA, which is what Conor is, elite MMA, to elite boxing. We've actually never seen that. So this is part of what I'm saying. There's a lot of mystery around this. And I feel like, again, on paper, you would think that would be still a recipe for failure. But maybe some of our assumptions are not quite known. In fact, this is a true statement, though, generally about transitioning. In that, well, for example, Big John McCarthy has made a point that a lot of the problems in MMA judging historically, now this is less so the case now, but at least historically has been that they got boxing judges to become MMA judges, and that there was a real, you guys have lived it, you've seen it, there's a real big learning curve with that. However, getting guys who were naturally MMA judges to go and become boxing judges, there's a learning curve there too, but a much less steep one, much less. It's much, much easier to get them to understand the nuances there than it is to go from boxing to MMA. So there is something to be said for that. But this is sort of the point I made previously. It's like, you know, I think it'll probably end up being something like a Metamorph situation, where you do see that the elite MMA guys, they are able to do certain things that elite jiu-jitsu guys aren't usually prepared for. And the one I mentioned before was, especially if you go back and watch the JT Torres Roy McDonald contest, it was getting up off the bottom. If they were feeling like there was trouble, you know, rather than using pure jiu-jitsu against a guy who you're basically technically overmatched against, you could just reset by underhooking and standing. And that's something that MMA guys are much, much better at, right? And the jiu-jitsu guys, in this particular case, JT Torres, just didn't have an answer for. Now, JT Torres was technically superior, you know, submitted him, but that was one thing that you could tell was like, that's interesting. I was not prepared for that. I think it'll be something like that, where basically you're still overmatched, right? But there might be a couple of interesting things that they're capable of doing. People have pointed to the clinch scenarios, maybe a situation where Conor might be able to have a little bit of an advantage there that we don't anticipate, given the obviously that the clinch position in MMA is a much more dynamic, involved, thorough undertaking. It's not that way in boxing. That may be true, that may not be true. It could be something else altogether. But yet that you're still overmatched. I mean, when people say things like, "Hey, you don't have to worry about you don't have to worry about knees and elbows, and you don't have to worry about kicks or wrestling or jiu-jitsu," it's like all that is true, but you're taking away all that stuff, and you're not staying in the same scenario. In other words, you're not doing MMA minus those things. You're doing a combative sport minus those things, plus all of these other nuances that are sport specific that don't exist in this one. So you're getting rid of some things, but you're adding in a ton, and not just adding in other elements that are new. The same elements that exist, a jab, is way different over there and way, 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 way more precise, way more specific, way more technical. You don't need a super tight technical jab in MMA. It's nice to have, and some guys can make effective use of it. But if you don't have a really hardcore, solid jab in boxing, you know, you got problems unless you have a bunch of other amazing things you can do. Well, let's see what's happening here. Well, apparently it's working now on the site. I'm not sure what happened. But anyway. So that's what I'm anticipating. I'm anticipating probably, it's just hard for me to imagine that you can just shortcut your way to beating the best guy of our generation unless he's fallen off a cliff athletically. I just can't believe that. But what I do think is that you might find some interesting nuances about what Conor does that a lot of boxing guys don't, and that generally they're just still overmatched. Do I really think you can just cheat the world by doing this? I mean, that's really what you're saying here, you know, unless he lands a lucky shot, you know, which is one thing. Let's assume he doesn't land a lucky shot. Do you really think you can rise to the elite ranks of boxing by never boxing? I mean, that sounds incredibly ludicrous, right? Can you rise to the top of MMA, never fighting MMA, even if you fought boxing and you did wrestling? Can you really do that? Maybe, but that doesn't seem very likely, does it? You know, the best way to get good at something is to do it, and then to do it for a very long period of time. I just don't think there's shortcuts like this in life. I also think, though, that maybe Conor has more than some of us are prepared for, and that maybe he will show us that there are certain things that you get from MMA striking that can have a transfer quality that we weren't properly appreciating before. And that he'll lose, but he'll lose in a relatively respectable way. That's sort of what my view on the whole matter is. But Holm is right. It is easier to go from an art form where you've done something and, you know, narrow it versus where you've not done something and then expand it. And then all the things you have bad habits in, they carry over. It's much more easy to take someone who's got sort of a limited ability and then shape it in a one specific direction. Like, so you got a limited amount of striking and we can shape it in a certain direction versus I've got this really sharp, precise world of striking. I'm going to carry it over to this open-ended universe where all these variables come into play that make all those habits, not so helpful. It's like it's tabula rasa carrying over in the MMA sense. Another Nick Diaz question. Been a huge fan of Nick Diaz since forever. The first UFC I watched was UFC 137, Diaz versus Penn. And since then, he quickly became my favorite fighter now that my fandom has been established. Let's go to the questions. Has anything changed with regards to you interviewing him on Friday, or is that still on? As far as I know, that's on. Please God. With his latest USADA violation, do you still think we will see the older Diaz brother fight again? Or is it time for Nick Diaz fans to move on and accept that he is done fighting? Well, we'll find out on Friday, but my general thoughts on the situation. Jordan Breen had a good article in Shirt Dog about it, so you should give that a look. But also it says, I live in the UK, so will you be uploading the Diaz brother interviews to YouTube? Yes. I've actually hired a videographer to come help me. So don't worry. If you don't have SiriusXM, no problem. I will make these things readily available to you. Trust me. That being said, general thoughts on the situation. Yeah, I made a point about this on my radio show. I'm just going to repeat it here. I'm not asking the world to agree with me. I get that USADA has a job to do, and I get that they believe in the sanctity of their job. I don't care about Nick Diaz missing a whereabouts program at all. I don't care. He's not competing. He's not under. I mean, he's under contract, but he's not. There's no bout agreement pending. He doesn't. He's just sort of out there living his life. He happens to have a contractual obligation, technically speaking. But this is what we want our anti-doping authorities to do: is punish a guy who's out there not even remotely interested in competing. Okay, all right. That's what you want. If that's what you think really is effective anti-doping, then by all means, knock yourselves out. But it seems to me like an epic waste of time. And you could say, well, Luke, isn't Diaz the architect of his own problems? Couldn't he have retired or just shown up or something? Yeah, sure, of course. I'm not saying that complying in the way that he was asked to comply is like the world's most onerous challenge. But, everyone wants to say, well, the Reebok deal was bad and USADA was good. They're two feathers in the same bird, man. It was forced on them. They had no say whatsoever. And I do think that the marijuana penalties that this organization has created and the UFC has helped codify are absurd, are totally absurd, and they need to stop in a heavy degree. And the fighters need to have some say in that. You might say, well, look, if the fighters have some say, that might lessen the strength of the anti-doping program. Yeah, good. That's exactly what I want to happen. We live in a world where you can't even have a conversation in a sport with a 100% injury rate, with God only knows what kind of significant brain trauma we're doing. We can't even have a conversation. I'm sure, here come the down boys. Wah! We can't even have a conversation about to what degree we should move the line medicinally. Everyone wants to say there's hard work and there's eating tilapia and asparagus, and then there's the chemical line over there. I have never bought this argument that the chemical line is the one that intellectually is defensible, that it's somehow uniquely and separately different. I mean, yes, those things that you can take that do provide a performance-enhancing benefit, but number one, you could argue that makes sports better. I mean, you're calling it performance-enhancing, and all of a sudden it's better without it. I don't think MMA or any sport is better without it, to be honest. I know that sounds blasphemous to some of your ears, but sorry, I'm not going to get up here and just lie to you about it. Right? You can't call it performance enhancing and then say sports is better without it. No, like literally it's better with it because it enhances performance. But forget about all that. We can't even have a conversation about to what degree we should move that line medicinally to help guys in a sport where there is a 100% injury rate. It's absurd. It's absurd. It's totally absurd. The fighters should have some kind of say over what they want. And in the end, what is the answer here? It's the fighters appear to want some degree of anti-doping. So if they collectively agree that these are things we want to police the ranks on each other, that's the system you should have. If they want that, that's what they should have. But I think that we can all agree, medicinally, we still don't have a really great treatment of marijuana use in the sport. And this guy, Nick Diaz, yes, he doesn't do the whereabouts program, although as an independent contractor, I'm not sure why he's supposed to. And even if he did, was he supposed to? This is what we really want to hammer this guy for: a 6-month to 2-year punishment over a missing whereabouts program in a time when he's on contract technically. I mean, this seems so absurd to me, so ridiculously absurd. You know, I just don't. I can't pretend to care that Diaz missed part of his whereabouts program. I just won't. I won't. And there's going to be a lot of guys in the media who will. Great. We can have a diversity of opinion. You can listen to them, and you can all clutch your pearls about how terrible it is that Nick Diaz didn't show up to a whereabouts program. I don't give an F. I don't care. I don't think he should be forced to do it. I think the anti-doping program that we have is no better than the Reebok deal. And in terms of its the principle by which it was forced on the fighters is no better than the Reebok deal. And I just don't care. And I don't care if fighters are using weed, even the week of a fight. Don't care. Only request I want is that they don't show up to the cage having used and still feeling the euphoric effects. That's all I care about. And that test they use for marijuana metabolites doesn't answer that question. So you figure it out. I'm so tired. I'm so tired of having to pretend that, like, you know, guys who want to use marijuana in a significant way are evil. You know, I'm so tired of having to pretend that these guys who put their bodies through absolute hell can't even have a conversation about to what degree we should potentially move the chemical line in a direction that can have a medicinal benefit. Like, I can't even bring this up without, I'm sure, somebody being like, Luke Thomas loves steroids. Yeah, well, if they help guys, right, to not be crippled when they're 70, I guess I do. I guess I do. You know, everyone feels like you feel like MMA got better after USADA came along. Like the fights are now just super awesome all of a sudden. I don't feel that way. I don't feel that way at all. Now it's a complicated series of factors that make MMA good or bad, or have fights fall through or not. It's not really one thing or the other. Can't pin that on USADA, good or bad. It's a number of things. But you feel like all of a sudden MMA got better. They're performance-enhancing drugs, but MMA got better. Okay. You reconcile that one. I don't think they got better. And more to the point, I've discussed this as well. There's no data on this to support this one way direction or the other. But, like, does it look to you like the amount? I mean, everyone's like, you got to have anti-doping in there because we got to keep these guys safe. We got to keep these guys safe. Does MMA look safer to you? Is there any less brain trauma happening? Is there any less trauma generally happening? Is there any evidence to support that? None. None. It's a joke. All these arguments about it are a joke. We got to do it to keep these guys safe. If you want to do it to say you want to preserve the integrity of competition, I suppose that's one direction you could go, but even then I don't buy that one. But this idea you're keeping guys safe, yeah, let me know how safe those guys are when that cage door closes and they're getting their brains rattled weekend after weekend after weekend after weekend after weekend after weekend. Right? And now we're going to worry about Nick Diaz not showing up to a program that wants to codify these things and handcuff these guys. Please, man. Just don't buy. I don't buy any of that stuff. Mighty Mouse signs with Malky. Can you give us some insight on why and how this happened? Yeah. Did I get a response yet? No, not yet. Oh, here come the emails. How could you say that? Because it makes sense. Sorry. I hate to tell you that. Let's see. Oh my God. All right. I can't deal with it. I am going to reach out to those various parties as well. I mean, the speculation is pretty obvious, right? Mighty Mouse has been sort of just going along with the program. I'm sure Matt Hume is, I know he's a super smart guy and he's a really successful guy. But is he you know, is he properly situated to be the best representation that Mighty Mouse can get? No, that's not what he does. He's not really a manager in that sense. And I think Mighty Mouse probably wants more aggressive representation. Right? That's really what it comes down to. He wants more aggressive representation. So I'll confirm that with him, and you can say, you know, whether or not Malky's the guy best situated to do that. But that's my sense of things. That I think he finally realized I can't keep doing things as normal. I need a guy whose 100% focus is representing my interests. You know, and Matt Hume does, but you know, Matt Hume's also VP of one championship and runs his gym and trains DJ. Like, how good can you be when you're, you know, you got all those different responsibilities? Justin Gaethje, is he the closest fighter you can think of that is like a feral animal in how he fights? Yes. What are your thoughts on him saying he does not care about brain trauma? And what was your initial reaction when you heard him say this? He said it on my show too. It's alarming. It's alarming to hear, but what do you want to say? This is why the sport has to be regulated, because you have to save guys from themselves like that. Straight up, I don't care about brain trauma. At least he's honest. At least he's honest. This is why the sport has to be regulated. This is why you need some kind of real, clear oversight. This is why you need guys to protect them, to be protected against themselves. You know, this is a clear case. I actually don't mind on some level that he's at peace with it, but that's not the issue. It's not that. It's always better when a guy has his own sense about, I don't want to do this anymore to protect my health. And of course, I'll never judge an athlete who says, I don't want to wreck my brain anymore. Okay. But it's not really what about their calibration is. You want to encourage that, not guys to retire early, but you want guys to retire when they feel like the time is right, and to have a healthy perspective about the long-term effects of brain damage and what kind of quality of life they want to have and what matters to them, what their priorities are. You really want to keep that in focus. But for the guys that aren't, you need to have a fail-safe in place. And Justin Gaethje is literally telling you, I don't give an F. So that's why you need another person in play or another entity in play that can stop that, right? When they say that enough is enough. And we need more significant tests about brain trauma, right? Because even if a guy is physically able to compete from the rest of his body, if there's brain trauma going on, they should be forced to retire. They should not be licensed by commissions, and that might end careers early. Hell, he might even be the stage where he's already at that place. And I'm okay with that. I'm much more okay with making guys stop because of brain trauma than I am, you know, various anti-doping issues. So yeah, that's why the government regulates this, is to protect guys like that from themselves. How will Justin Gaethje do in his first fight in the UFC versus Johnson? How do you see this fight going? What does each fighter need to do to win? Justin, I mean, it just needs to do with it. I think really what needs to happen is Johnson is a very accurate puncher and a very quick striker. I mean, you saw what he did against Dustin Poirier, right? Even against Khabib in the first round before he got taken down and mauled. He needs to do more of that. I think really staying on the outside, forcing a way out of clinching scenarios or short range striking. You know, he needs to be pumping the jab and moving. Really staying on his feet. He's got fast feet. And then I think in the second, third round, maybe, you know, midway through the second round, then begin to turn up the offense a little bit, right? If the guy has slowed down a little bit or has become even more aggressive, but in a linear, more predictable way. I just think trying to tangle with Justin early is a bad idea. He does slow down, but you know, he's got vicious punches and leg kicks. He likes to tie up. He can just wear you down. You believe you not tie up with Justin and believe I've got 1-2 more shots and I'm going to put this guy down, and he just doesn't go down. At least he hasn't yet. Not enough anyway. So to me, it's really about sticking and moving. Something like, and I'm not comparing it, something like Anderson Silva, Chris Lieben. Right? I mean, that was a very obviously, you know, different, strange scenario, but something like that. where guys just coming at you, and you're sticking the move, and you're moving and you're circling and everything else. That's what you need. What was the crazy fight Nate was offered? I don't know. Now that he'll be suspended, it won't happen anyways. Well, Nate's not suspended. Someone says CM Punk. Yes, sure. Woodley's mystery fight. A few weeks back, you mentioned that there were talks that Woodley fighting someone really random. Now he's booked up against Maya. Did you share who that was? No. MMA interest question. After covering MMA for so many years, do you still have the same level of excitement for it you used to have when you started? It's a good question. The answer is no. But I came at it from a different perspective. This is hilarious. You get into this business, everyone's like, I want to be an MMA journalist. I want to go into this because they're fans and they want to be close to the action. But when you get to this place, you're not allowed to be a fan anymore. Now, it's a question you need to answer for yourself. What do you really want to do? Now, you can be a member of the media and not be a journalist, and I think get to still be a fan. You know, Brendan Schaub, for example, I would consider him media. He's obviously not doing journalism, which is okay. I'm not judging him for it. I mean, not everyone needs to or has to. There's nothing wrong with that. And so, as you can see, he can still be close to the action, keep his fandom, and still talk about the fights in a way that, you know, I think is analytical and both fan-like, right? He can do all those things. And so he has a little bit more latitude in that direction. But I see a lot of people being like, well, I want to be a journalist. If you want to be a journalist, it's not that you can't be an admirer of certain athletes or that you can't love MMA as such, but you don't get to be a fan anymore. You know, you need to ask yourself if you're willing to make that trade-off. And like anything, if you do enough of it, it becomes less interesting over time. But here's what I'll say about this. It's like, do I like the sport like I used to like the sport? No. But I liked it like a lot of you guys did in this incredibly obsessive way where all I did was read about it and all I did was watch it and all I did was, you know, just consume it at all times. And, you know, I lost friends doing it. I lost girlfriends doing it because I was just so utterly consumed. And that's just not good. I mean, I mean a lot of fans who are like, I don't care about anything else but MMA. That's not a place you want to be, man. It's not good, you know, and it doesn't last. Like, no one feels that way forever. Now, maybe you have to get it out of your system like I had to get it out of my system, but the answer to your question is this. Now I'm in a place where I don't put my rooting interest in a person. I don't put my rooting interest in an organization. I put my rooting interest in, I love watching athletic excellence, right? So it's really what it's about. I love watching. I think there's something incredible about fist fighting. Especially when there's two guys extraordinarily good at it. To me, it is primal. It is impossible to look away. It speaks to the soul of me. It makes me feel something, you know? And I still feel that way about it. But what I don't feel is like, oh my God, I love, you know, this fighter or that organization. You can't do that anymore. Ethically, you can't do it. And more than that, it's just not sustainable. So the level of enthusiasm I have has gone down, but I've created it in a way that is more sustainable over time. What type of fights does it take to get you really excited for? Super good ones, elite ones. Are there any fights coming up that you cannot wait for? Cannot wait's a strong word. Well, Mayweather McGregor is just going to be insane. I just don't even know what to expect anymore out of that. But Gastelum, Weidman, I'm very, very excited about that one. And of course, Romero Whittaker coming up. Jones DC, no doubt about it. Trying to think what else. That's about it for right now. Has there ever been a fight you were so excited for you could not stop thinking about it? Oh, sure, man. I remember I remember before the Fedor versus Crow Cop fight, I was like, or the first GSP and the second GSP BJ Penn fight. You just think about them all day long, from sun up to sundown. But this is not. It's not healthy. It's really not, and it's not sustainable. And it's if you want to get into this business, you have to unlearn that instinct immediately because it will not serve you. So, oh yeah, speaking of which, Gaslam versus Weidman, can you do a breakdown of this fight? And I'll do it later, as someone notes in the comments. Overeem's comments on Fedor. I did not hear them. What did he say? I did not see them. Accurate, or is he just being a tad bit too salty? Overeem is an underrated salty dog. Now, he's not a hater, right? He's not a hater. I've seen him. He's complimentary of a lot of people. I think he gives guys their due, but he's an underrated salty dog. You know, salty dog is like a lesser version of a hater. He's not a hater. He doesn't go out there and say, "I don't like this guy's success." It's not true, you know. But he is. My man's got a salt lick in this house, I'm sure. JDS versus Ngannou. Now that JDS versus Ngannou has been booked, how do you feel about this fight? I'm not against this fight like everybody else is. I mean, if you care about JDS's health, there are some questions about, you know, what kind of long-term participation does he really have left in the sport and how good of an idea is this? Okay, that's fine. But it feels to me like appropriate matchmaking. I just think a lot of people like JDS and they feel bad that this might go real badly for him. But them's the breaks, y'all. This is the game we're in. This is the hurt business. If he gets really hurt here, then we can have questions about whether or not he should continue. You can have questions about whether he should have continued really after the Kane Wars. He did change his game up a little bit and really use it to stick behind the jab much more than he had previously. But I don't think he was ever the same after the Kane Wars. You know, and I don't think he's getting knocked out by Stipe as quickly as he did. He's left a big piece of himself in the octagon over the years. Bellator offered you a 0-0 dog and a 6-figure payday for that fight. Would you take it? No. Also, if you did take it, would you promote or interview yourself? Sure. Any news on the return of Carlos Condit? Nope. Lawler Cerrone. What is your take on the situation with Dana saying it will not happen in 214, but surprise, now it's happening? You mean as Ariel and I reported it? I know there's a concern for Lawler. What? Okay, if it's the best Lawler versus the best Cowboy who wins, probably in that case Lawler, but who knows what version we're going to get. My understanding was, the way it was, in talking to the various people I talked to in order to report that story, my understanding was that the UFC may have made decisions really, really quickly, and we're still waiting on some medical information. And then when they got that medical information, decided to dial it back. Like, you first saw Dana White being like, "Oh, there's no way he's even ready for 214." Well, it turned out that there was enough medical evidence to believe that he'd be quite ready for 214. So they just did that in the end. So it was just a little bit of them jumping the gun because they thought it might have been worse than it was. Bad enough that he couldn't fight this weekend, not so bad that it had to call for a tremendous delay. And so I think it was just the UFC being, or maybe Dana White personally being a little bit overzealous. But all's well that ends well. That was my understanding, was that they made decisions and they were like, well, the final tests are not in yet. What are you doing? And then more information was made available, and they're like, all right, let's just put up 214, which is good for 214. It's going to be a sick card, you know. All right, it is well, it's 11:17 here, but it's 2:15. Let's go to the Twitter machine if we can. You can give me a tweet at L Thomas News, or you can use the hashtag chat rappers. Someone says, please don't use the word codify anymore. Codify, 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 codify. There we go. Don't touch the minibar. This ain't my first rodeo in Vegas, y'all. I've been here almost, 40 times? I mean, I'm well aware of how the hotels here work. Is it fair to say watching MMA gives you a feeling that you can't get out of the likes of boxing? No, it's not true. Just over time, I prefer MMA to boxing, but it's not true that I get exclusively different feelings for MMA versus boxing. If it's a big fight, it's a big fight for me. But you may not feel that way, and that's okay. Like, not everyone has to have the same kind of fandom. Who's the biggest bust in UFC history? Someone who never reached the heights expected of them. Man, that's a good question. That's a good one. Biggest bust in UFC history? It's probably somebody from years ago, not recent. I guess maybe, what's his name? The kid from The Ultimate Fighter, the Filipino kid, who was called the next Anderson Silva. I forget his name now. And that was not fair to him that he got labeled that way, but there's probably something with that, you know. What film do you think should get remade, and what Holy Grail film should never get remade? Jesus, I don't know. What film do you think should get remade? I don't know. Put me on the spot with that one. And what film should never get remade? Oh, you could probably redo Lawrence of Arabia. Well, I know that's sort of a deep cut, but you could redo Lawrence of Arabia. And what film should never get remade? You guys know I'm partial to Akira Kurosawa, so don't touch his stuff. Felipe Nover. Yes, that's the guy, Felipe Nover. I mean, I think he's a very talented guy, but, you know, if someone sets you up to be the next Anderson Silva, and you end up having like a very middling UFC career, there's probably something to be said for what you met versus expectations, you know. If Ronda did return, who would you pick for an opponent, and what camp should she train at? Well, she should train probably somewhere close to home. But those West Coast camps might do. And I would pick somebody for her decidedly outside the top 5. So, yeah. Here's my question. Do all the champs get pay-per-view points? Except DJ? My understanding is yes. But I haven't gone through all of their contracts. But that's my understanding, yes. Do you think McGregor would intentionally release vids and promotional material displaying poor technique? Yes. Absolutely think he might do that. What are the chances Conor gets rocked and does something illegal? I think low. What do you do with Travis Brown if he loses this weekend? The heavyweight is so thin. Can you really cut the guy? That's tough. They might just cut him at that point, which would be crazy. But I just don't see that as very likely. I mean, it's possible, but not likely. Rank these in terms of athleticism in MMA. So you got Romero, Jones, Randleman, Brock, GSP. Oof, that's a tough one. So maybe Romero 1, maybe Brock 2, Randleman 3, GSP 4. I guess Kane 5 and Jones last. You could switch Randleman and Brock if you wanted, and maybe GSP and Kane. But I don't see how Jones is a better athlete than those guys, like pure athlete. What's next for you, Gaethje? Don't know. If Maymack isn't a super fight, what is it? A boxing fight. You expect DC versus Jones 2 to do over 1.2 million pay-per-view buys? No. Let's just take a drink if Luke says the word jaundiced. How many drinks did you take today? Do you think given Whittaker's speed advantage, he could stop Romero in this fight? Yes, absolutely. We've seen faster fighters like Brunson hurt him badly. Yep, absolutely. And he's accurate too, and great timing. Like, he's not like super lightning quick. Whittaker, he's fast, very fast. but he's got great timing. You know, everything goes at the right time. How different would the UFC look if it were run by Scott Coker? I don't think it'd be fair to say it would look like Bellator, because I don't think that's true, but it might look like a mix of Bellator and UFC. Some kind of mix where you have these deeper divisions that have to be manicured in a proper way, but also that you might get some bizarre matchups. Like if Scott, for example, if Scott Coker were running the UFC, I think they would make a Fabricio Verdum Luke Rockhold fight. I think they would do that because it would be crazy and you'd want to see it and it'd be unusual and organic to an extent. That is what I think is some of the key differences between them. So things like that might happen, you know, because Verdum is kind of on the outside looking in. I mean, if he wins against Overeem, I guess he's back in title contention, but you know, he's not exactly like at the very, very top of the list. And Luke Rockhold's kind of doing his own thing in middleweight at the moment, and something like that is what I think Rockhold would do, or what Coker would do. Well, I see the new Man United, Bayern, and Juventus kits. Nubs, all three. What says they're working out at the gym on their off day? Well, take less pictures and keep pumping iron. Who are your two favorites to contest the UFC flyweight belt? I would have said John Dodson, but that got answered. So I guess I'll say Pettis, and maybe in one more crack at Benavidez, you know? What are your thoughts on cantaloupe? Is it not the absolute worst thing you can eat at a cookout? No, you can eat no. Where does this gentleman live? I don't know where he lives. I can tell you this. Where I live, in the capital of Los Estados Unidos, full of liberals, which is fine. You guys know I love them. But these clowns show up to parties with every manner of kale food varieties. Can we just have a conversation about kale? Kale sucks. Like, I know it's a superfood and it's nutrient dense and provides all manner of diet support for you, but it's like chewing drywall. It's absolutely gross. You have to blanch it just to make it palatable. These people, you go to these places in DC, and so I was like, here's my unblanched, just straight up raw kale, chopped up julienne, like Louis Marco, with craisins. You know, it's like this. You know, this is what a raccoon eats when they're digging through the dumpster. This is. You've seen those guys with the riding mowers, and it has a vacuum feature, and then the grass clippings go in the back, and they dump them on the ground. It's like pour them on the ground and chuck a handful of craisins on top, and that's a kale salad. It's garbage. It's garbage. So no, cantaloupe can be quite wonderful and delicious on a hot summer afternoon. You clowns bringing kale chips. Oh, I fried the kale. Well, fry the kale and then throw it in the garbage. I don't need it. If I need something nutrient dense, I can probably eat spinach. Spinach you can make with like cheese and casseroles or whatever. Or you can just have spinach straight with just some lemon and some salt. You know, if you're really that hard up for it. Kale is just, please, this whole thing, we're like, I'm going to have a kale salad. Well, you know, you eat like a giraffe. So don't bring it to the party. If you want to eat that nonsense at home, eat it at home. But I don't, you know, there was this tweet I saw. I think it was Matt Iglesias who made a joke about it. And it was this dude who was tweeting. He goes, just finished a session of hot yoga, cooling down with refreshing coconut water and kale chips. Nothing better. And I think Matt Iglesias wrote, this is the most liberal tweet ever. It's true. It's like you went to hot yoga, you had coconut water, and I like coconut water. I mean, whatever. With kale chips, but the combo, you know, like saying it's just too liberal for me. Almost a year to being full-time for SiriusXM. What are the positive and negative aspects of the job? Well, there's a lot of positives. you know, having your own show with your own name on it, being able to have total creative control over something like that, being able to go 5 days a week in radio is like widely considered to be the holy grail of radio opportunities. So that's just a tremendous amount of fun. And, you know, talking to a lot more people than I ordinarily would talk to, pulls me out some of my bad habits. You know, obviously on the bad side, it's, you know, it's behind a paywall. So there's a visibility issue sometimes. But we're working on that, and we'll see what the next contract gives us in terms of opening up some doors. And, yeah, so most positive would just be total creative control, and most negative probably would be the visibility issue. Oh, someone said on the MMA Hour, Overeem said he was targeting a rematch with Miocic. Does finishing Verdum get him there? It might, yeah. There's still Kane kind of hanging out in the wings, which is your X factor, but it puts him pretty close. It puts him pretty close. Have you heard anything about the World Tour from the Maymack fight? Nothing new. Is it possible that Conor challenges Floyd to MMA? I mean, sure, but Floyd would. I mean, don't hold your breath waiting on Floyd to fight him in MMA. Is DC Jones 2 the fight for also the #1 pound-for-pound fighter? You can make a credible case that it is. I think it's like the Canelo Triple G of MMA. Would you agree? It's sort of, because the two most important divisions in boxing historically have been heavyweight and middleweight, which is, this is the middleweight contest, being Triple G. You know, these are some of the best fighters ever that have competed at middleweight. Light heavyweight has been like that historically. You know, in Pride, you had Vanderlei, and you had Rampage, and for a while, Dan Henderson. On this side, you had Tito, and you had Vitor, and you had Randy, and you had Chuck. And so some of the better fights ever have been in that division. It's going down a bit of a slide, and Shogun and everything. It's going down a bit of a slide since then. So I don't know that middleweight exactly. I don't know that light heavyweight MMA is boxing's middleweight. I don't think that's quite exactly right. But in terms of two guys in the same division also battling for pound rights, that does make sense. All right, I am terribly sorry. Fix this. I am terribly sorry about the technical difficulties today, but they were not my fault, and I believe they got fixed at the very end. So thank you to my boss, who I believe is still watching. We'll see. If you have any questions for me, LukeThomasNews@gmail.com. By the way, on the Monday Morning Analyst, I asked you guys if you have any technical questions about Mayweather and McGregor. Well, not what are they going to make, and who's going to come out first, and what's their music going to be, and none of that stuff. But if you have questions about technique, email me at LukeThomasNews@gmail.com. I'm going to talk to, if I don't know the answer, and many times I won't, I'm going to ask famous fighters or coaches to help me out with that, put something together for a big preview for that fight. The responses have been tremendous. You guys knocked it out of the park. Amazing, amazing job you guys were able to do with that. So many good questions, so many angles I didn't even think about. Really, really impressive. So keep those coming. They're really, really good. LukeThomasNews@gmail.com, and just put like Maymack question in the subject line. And I'll take a look at those. I can't promise you that all the questions will get answered, but I'll try and get as many of the good ones that I think make a lot of sense. That stuff about the clinch and whatnot. I'll get those answered by as many qualified people as I can. Subscribe to MMA Fighting. I got to go to the open workouts, and it is open to the public. If you see me, you can say hi. Just don't be weird. And until next time, thank you guys so much for watching. From Vegas, stay frosty.